Before the dawn broke on June 6, 1944, a silence hovered over the beaches of Normandy that felt heavier than any storm-tossed sea. The world was on a knife's edge, the smell of cordite, and fear hung thick in the air, like a coming winter. For millions who lived under the smoke of war, history was not a distant notion but an unending present of loss and longing. What forces, unseen yet unstoppable, would converge here and fracture the fate of nations? What invisible line lay between despair and deliverance, between the world that was and the world that was about to be born? In that quiet hour before sunrise, the tides and stars conspired to shape what would become the largest seaborne invasion in history, an operation that would push humanity into its most violent transformation in a generation. Something irreversible was about to happen, something that would redefine courage, sacrifice, and the fate of freedom itself. Long before battleships steamed through the English Channel, before the first paratrooper leapt into a moonless sky, life in Europe carried the hum of ordinary existence. In the coastal towns of Normandy, the rhythm of life followed the tides and the seasons. Cows lowed in misty fields at dawn. Fishermen hauled nets through seas that gleamed like polished gunmetal in the summer sun. Children chased ribbons of wine down narrow lanes where laughter echoed against stone walls that had stood unchanged for centuries. Families gathered at supper tables beneath the soft glow of oil lamps, sharing bread and cheese and stories of harvests past. The world seemed ordered, the kind of world where people could dream futures under blue skies. Stars appeared each night, fixed and patient, silent witnesses to the births, marriages, and quiet deaths that mark ordinary human lives. People believed, in their small daily ways, that life would continue much as it always had. Hope was not a grand philosophy but the belief that tomorrow would not be worse than today. Yet, beneath these patterns of normalcy, an unraveling was already underway. The Great War, that war to end all wars, had marked Europe with scars that never fully healed. Political dreams of peace gave way to nightmares of nationalism and aggression. Fear spread like a contagion, infecting governments and ordinary citizens alike. Economies collapsed, dignity eroded, and the promise of prosperity fell away like autumn leaves in the wind. By the 1930s, Europe was a tinderbox of resentments and fractured identities, its people teetering on the brink of another catastrophe. Then came the storm. Germany, under the iron fist of Adolf Hitler. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, was both a doctrine and a spectacle of terror. Armored divisions and Stuka, dive bombers moved with a precision that seemed almost inhuman. Warsaw fell, Paris succumbed, and the British expeditionary forces evacuated from Dunkirk in a mass exodus of desperation and survival. By the summer of 1940, much of Western Europe lay under the shadow of German occupation. The spectre of tyranny, once dismissed as distant rumor, had grasped the heart of the continent. In Britain, Londoners became familiar with the thunderous roar of Luftwaffe raids at night. The sky ruptured with fire as the city endured the Blitz. Houses crumbled into rubble. Families huddled in underground stations to escape the bombardment, clutching one another in the darkness, whispering prayers against the unthinkable. Across the Channel, in France, life was a study in constraint and fear. Every glance over a shoulder could reveal the uniformed stare of an occupying soldier. French farmers worked fields, irrigated not just with sweat but with the knowledge that every harvest might be seized to feed a war machine not their own. Amid this desolation, Allied leaders convened in dimly lit rooms, thick with cigarette smoke and the gravity of choices that would shape destinies. Winston Churchill, whose voice would come to echo through the corridors of history, spoke of blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States, pledged that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, recalling a promise that had once seen a nation through the Great Depression. Together with leaders from Canada and Free French forces under Charles de Gaulle, they conceived a plan to liberate occupied Europe. It was audacious, unprecedented, and born from an iron need, Operation Overlord. The plan was a tapestry woven of hope and terror. It was not merely a military strategy but a wager on human will, against the seemingly inexorable force of oppression. Its objective was simple in words but monstrous in execution. Establish a beachhead on the coast of Normandy, break through Hitler's Atlantic Wall, and begin the liberation of Western Europe. In England, troops gathered from across the globe. Young men, British, American, Canadian, and others, stood shoulder to shoulder in crowded barracks, their faces lined with equal measures of resolve and anxiety. The hum of drills and the barked orders of sergeants became their new normal. Letters from home arrived with pleas to return safely, signed with trembling hands and hopeful hearts. Many of these soldiers were barely out of youth, their thoughts divided between the quiet innocence of past lives and the unimaginable trials that lay ahead. The engineers, cartographers, and intelligence officers formed the silent backbone of this enterprise. Code names like Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword became etched into operational maps, each representing a segment of the coastline with its own risks and defenses. Machines, amphibious tanks, Higgins boats, gliders, and glistening fleets of Liberty ships were readied under strict secrecy. But it was human courage that would be the true engine of this change. In the pitch-black hours before the invasion, hundreds of paratroopers descended from the sky like specters, caught between clouds and gunfire. They landed in fields scattered with poppies and dangers unseen. Many would never see the sunrise again. Their descent was a silent testament to the uneasy dance between hope and destruction. On the water's edge, thousands on thousands of troops waited in landing craft, their faces pale as the canvas above them quivered with the promise of battle. At 6:30 on June 6th, the first wave struck. The sea was choppy, and the early morning grey blurred into gunsmoke and explosions. Omaha Beach, designated for American forces, became a crucible of chaos. Machine gun fire rasped across the sand. Men fell. Shouts of pain and courage tangled with the roar of artillery. Some crawled forward, blinded by saltwater and grit, driven by sheer will. These were not mythical heroes but flesh and blood individuals, carpenters, farmers, students, thrust into a moment that would define them. Behind them, engineers labored feverishly to clear obstacles, steel hedgehogs, wooden stakes, hidden mines, laid by the German defenders to turn every foot of sand into a grave. Many paid with their lives. Along Gold and Juno beaches, British and Canadian forces met fierce resistance but carved vital openings. By midday, despite mounting casualties, the Allies had secured tenuous footholds. Against overwhelming odds, they turned the tide on tyranny. But the human cost, was staggering. On the beaches, bodies of the fallen lay where they had fallen. Letters meant to be mailed home were picked up by medics and folded into collections that would never be delivered. In quiet villages nearby, civilians huddled in farmhouses or hid in cellars, unsure whether liberation or bombardment would come first. For every strategic gain, there were micro-stories of personal loss. A young American private who vowed to survive to dance with his bride again. A Canadian medic who cradled shattered boys, hands even as her own tears fell like rain. A Norman mother who watched from a shuttered window as her village became a battleground. By nightfall of that first day, more than 150,000 Allied troops had stormed through the water and soil of Normandy. The beaches were no longer mere lines, on a map but hard-won ground soaked with sacrifice. 6,000 Allied servicemen were killed or wounded on D-Day alone, and countless more were forever changed in body and spirit. The world had stepped across a threshold. The old patterns of domination and fear were cracking. In the days that followed, the fighting did not pause. The bocage, dense hedgerows that sectioned the Normandy countryside, became a nightmare for advancing troops. Snipers lurked in hidden lanes. Armored divisions bogged down in mud as relentless rain fell. But with each grueling mile, the Allies advanced. History, lived moment by moment, was both a tragedy and a testament to resilience. As the weeks unfolded, Paris, the heart of France, watched from afar. The city had become an emblem of occupation, its grand boulevards muted under the weight of German flags. Yet whispers of liberation began to stir. French resistance fighters, long harassed and hunted, seized their moment to rise. They sabotaged rail lines, attacked patrols, and sent messages of encouragement to their countrymen still fighting on distant fields. On August 25, 1944, Paris was liberated. The Arc de Triomphe stood again under French flags. Children danced in the streets. Tears flowed freely among people who had known suffering and hope in equal measure. But liberation was not the end of pain. It was the opening of a new chapter in a world still torn by conflict. Operation Overlord's success had opened the door to the retreat of Nazi forces from Western Europe. For the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front, the weight of war had been unfathomable. Cities like Stalingrad and Leningrad had endured sieges that defy comprehension. In the Pacific, other battles raged between Allied forces and the Empire of Japan. The war was global in its destructiveness, with humanity scattered across continents like broken pieces of a once beautiful mosaic. Yet the ripples of Operation Overlord would spread far beyond the battlefield. The war's end in 1945 ushered in a new world order, one shaped by the competing visions of superpowers. The trauma of total war birthed institutions designed to prevent future catastrophes. The United Nations, declarations of human rights, and alliances such as NATO. The yearning for peace, however imperfectly realized, became the guiding creed of a generation. But the legacy was not without shadows. The Cold War, born from distrust between former allies, plunged half the world into decades of fear and proxy conflicts. Empires weakened by war receded. Yet the process of decolonization was fraught with its own violence and upheaval. Nations struggled to define identity in the wake of imperial rule, sometimes with greater cost than they. Battles that brought distant soldiers to their shores. In Europe, the scars of World War II shaped political and social structures for generations. The pain of occupation left imprints on cultural memory. Entire families carried silences about lost loved ones that stretched across lifetimes. Survivors of the Holocaust, the most devastating genocide in recorded history, bore horrors that defy full expression, unimaginable losses of communities, languages, and futures erased. Still, from those depths arose remarkable resilience. Countries rebuilt. Art emerged to wrestle with trauma. Literature, film, and music became vessels for memory and reckoning. In cities once scarred by war, new generations grew up unaware of the soil's blooded history, yet unknowingly shaped by its legacy. Today, we live in a world fundamentally shaped by Operation Overlord. The European Union, a bold experiment in collective identity and cooperation, stands on the ashes of a destroyed continent. The idea that sovereign nations could live in peace was once a folly. Now it is a guiding aspiration, imperfect yet purposeful. The United States remains a dominant global force. Its role as a defender of democratic values rooted in the sacrifices of the Second World War. Canada's contributions are remembered with pride. The United Kingdom, France, Germany, all bear histories marked by rupture and rebirth. Yet beneath the surface of modern life are hidden consequences of that era's choices. Borders drawn, alliances formed, and ideologies contested have created tensions that still ebb and flow across continents. The spectre of nationalism, once almost extinguished in the ruins of war, finds new voices in modern politics. The promise of unity and peace is continually tested by forces that thrive on division. And still we ask the same quiet question that hovered over the waters of Normandy at dawn. What does it truly cost to choose freedom? What are we willing to sacrifice to protect it? History does not disappear. It is reborn in every moment we decide whether to uphold dignity or surrender it to fear. The beaches of Normandy, once hellish battlegrounds, now hold memorials and weathered headstones that face the sea. In the wind-stirred grasses, visitors stand in silence, listening not just with ears but with memory itself. The story of Operation Overlord lingers as both caution and inspiration, a reminder that humanity's future is neither written nor secure, but forged by the choices of ordinary people in extraordinary times. History doesn't disappear, and with that breath, we remember.